So, I want us to think about church, who we are, and we're going to use Jenga bricks. My background is I'm a youth worker. I'm a youth specialist minister, which means I'm a Baptist minister and a youth worker all rolled into one. I've been a minister for about 27 years. And the first church I served in had about 200 people in Manchester. We had 3 worship bands. The only problem with that was they all used to argue. We had a certainty in our preaching. This is what you should believe. We had small groups. We then had cell groups. I don't know if you did cell groups here, but that was going to be the new revolution of church life. We had youth groups and children's groups. In fact, my husband and I, for a while, were seeing over 300 young people a week in schools work, out on the streets. We had thriving youth groups. I started working with young people out on the streets because we had a bunch of young people that were hard to manage, and they got permanently banned. I had a real issue with that. So you're banning someone from church, really? So I worked with them out on the streets. I'd done that back in my teenage years. It's called detached youth work. You just wander around, talk to young people. What's great is if they want to destroy a bus shelter, it's not my problem. I can still build a relationship with them on the streets. I don't have a program. I'm just there to talk to them. I did lots of evangelism. We've done door to door. We've done sketchboarding. Did you ever do the Jesus videos thing? Used to knock on the doors and give out videos about Jesus. We did that. So this church thing that was building, it was busy. I was exhausted. We had an open house for young people. They just used to come on their way home from school. That probably my most fruitful youth work years, actually, was young people just used to drop in for something to eat or something to drink, just used to chat. There were some issues with church too. It was a bit kind of male patriarchy, if I'm honest. As a young minister, all my role models were men. And I really struggled with that, actually, because I don't know if you noticed that women do things slightly different. We're not the same. So yeah, there were some issues. When I moved to a new church in Preston, we did some other things. We did Messy Church. We had a lunch club for adults with additional needs. We ran 3 community centres for the local housing association. Now, I'm going to stop building there. I could go higher, but I'm going to stop there because actually what I have noticed, that's all the stuff we were doing, but things were changing. Evening services became a thing of the past. Attendance at morning services became about 3 and 5, possibly for lots of people. Not when I was growing up as a teenager, I was in church for 3 different services on a Sunday, and I don't come from a Christian family. In fact, I slept here. I was saying this. I came here with the Girls' Brigade 45 years ago and slept in your building. There we go. The certainty of preaching, I think, has changed. I don't think that's a bad thing. Helping people to question and to think for themselves, but that's made some things feel a little bit unstable. Some of the work that we were doing out in the community, in the schools, was kind of over here, or the detached youth work. Some of those young people became followers of Jesus, and we tried to bring them in here, but they didn't quite fit, you know. They didn't quite look the same as us. The youth work and the community work actually became really difficult. Really challenging because we were dealing with different people. What began to happen was the church folks withdrew from that and left 1 or 2 people out there still in the community, because my senior minister at the time said, these people are not proper followers of Jesus unless they come to church on a Sunday. I'm a bit older and wiser now, and I would have said, I think you're talking rubbish, actually, but there we go. But I was young then, and I didn't say that. Over the years, there's been various conversations in churches. We're having one at the moment nationally. Human sexuality, the refugee issues. Where do we fit with all that? Black Lives Matter. Where do we fit with that? What are we saying? What I'm trying to show with this tower is, it feels like this is really unstable. As I go around churches, where are the churches of 200? Where are the big youth groups? They're not there anymore in the same way as they used to be. It always does this. I get to a stage where I can't get a brick out. It feels like this church that discipled me, that was my family, is a lot more unstable than it was when I started out in ministry 27 years ago. In Jaywick, there are 4 churches for 5,000 people. There are less than 10 people in each of those churches on a Sunday morning. We are rolling out the same thing, but actually it's not impacting lives. It's not changing lives. It's not helping people follow Jesus. Not everyone. For some of us, it works. For some of us, it doesn't. We are living in changing times. The decline of the church has been forecast for generations, and we are seeing it before our eyes. Even through, I'll get happier in a bit. Don't get depressed. I will get happier in a minute. Even through COVID, some churches, that's been a good and positive time. For some churches, it's brought them right to the end. Some churches have closed. For some churches, folks haven't come back. Families in particular, up and down the country, have not come back. So what do we do? Do we carry on doing the same thing? Or do we release some people to go out and do something very different? I am really thankful for Home Mission. From January, I will be getting part of a stipend to support what we're doing in Jaywick as we try to do something very different. I do wonder whether we're trying to keep something going that actually God says it's time to change. Is it God unsettling the church to be different? And do we need to be listening to that? We have a changing landscape in the country, in the world. I was listening to the news on the way here this morning. I don't do that very often anymore. It's depressing, isn't it? It's not good news. How do we change and relate to what's going on? So we heard from Luke 4. As a follower of Jesus, you and I are called to follow Jesus' example. Okay, that's all of us. We are called to bring good news to the poor. And we need to think and work out what that looks like where we live on our street. What does good news look like for your neighbours? Not your neighbours of the church building here, for your neighbours on your street. What would it look like if you were going to be a chaplain to the neighbours on your street? Does good news look like, come and join us at church and fill in some of our gaps? Because sometimes that's what it feels like. Please come and help, because otherwise we can't keep going. I was at a meeting this week about warm hubs. Have you heard of warm hubs? It's about providing warm spaces over the winter. And it's going to be a big issue in Jaywick. And I could do something big. I was asked whether I would lead the work in Jaywick to provide warm hubs. And I said, I'll go away and think about it. And as I walked down my street of 7 houses, I heard God's voice. And God said, I don't want you to do the big. I want you to look after the 7 houses on your street, 3 of whom we know will really struggle to heat their homes. I don't want you to do the big and the fancy and get your name in lights. I want you to look after the 7 houses on your street this winter. It was such a voice. I felt like I've been hit around the back of the head. I think that's what I'm going to end up doing, although I'm struggling with not doing the big as well. The other thing that passage in Luke says is proclaiming freedom, setting people free from oppression. What does that look like in your community? Is that what we are about as church and as church people? There's another word in the Bible that's used a lot, the word shalom. It's used 250 times in the Old Testament. It's a bit important then, isn't it, really? And the New Testament, there's an equivalent word, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Erain. Thank you. See, he's clever. That's used 90 times, okay? So that's 340 times this word is used. That's quite important. It means being a person of justice, of peace, of fairness, of wholeness. We see Jesus doing that. If you read the Jesus story, that's exactly what we see. He reached the people on the margins who were excluded from the temple. And we're called to do the same thing. How do we reach the people on the margins of our community? Whatever that means for you here. I don't know what those people are here. So we're called to go and not just do shalom here and be peacemakers here in our church community. We're called to do it over here. We're called to be people of fairness and justice over here. To bring out God's colours in the community where we live. I want to think for a moment about that Moses and the burning bush story. There are many stories in the Bible that talk about key change moments in history. Moses is one of them. He took the people out of slavery. It's a really long story, and that was quite a long reading, but that's nowhere near the whole story, is it? And I picked it because it's a familiar story. He sees that burning bush and God calls him. What does Moses say? No, I can't. No, I'm not able. They're never going to believe me. Not me. And God says to Moses, what's in your hand? And do you know what he had in his hand? He had a bit of wood. He had a bit of wood that helped him look after the sheep. It was the tool of his trade. And God used that and used Moses. Wonder what the tool of your trade is. My husband says the tool of my trade is I can talk to anybody about anything, anywhere. And that is a tool of my trade. That's what I spend most of my days doing at the moment. God asked Moses to surrender that bit of wood to him. And as he threw it on the floor, it became a snake. If you went through Sunday school, you would have learnt those stories. That was the thing that says to Moses, God is with me and I can do this. But everyday bit of wood, when surrendered to God, becomes known as the staff of God. What have you got in your hands? However young you are, however old you are, you have tools of your trade that God is saying, surrender it to me in order to go and be that peacemaker, justice maker, bring her out of God's colours in the community where you live. This may look unstable, but actually maybe God's calling us out there. As we see the unstable structure of the church and observe the changing landscape of our country and our world, what doesn't change is our calling from Jesus to go and be his disciple, to go and take his shalom out into our community. And what probably hasn't changed as well is your answer to God. I can't. I'm too old. I'm past it. I don't know how to do it. Moses' common response to God all the way through that story is but God, I can't speak well enough. There's some other stories in the Bible of people that God used. Noah was a drunk. Abraham was old, and I mean proper old. Jacob was a deceiver. Leah wasn't seen as beautiful. Moses had a stutter. Gideon was afraid. Samson was a womanizer. Rahab was a sex worker. David committed adultery and murder, and yet it was a man after God's own heart. Elijah was suicidal. Adam and Eve and Jonah all ran away from God. Lazarus was dead. God still used him. Job was a bankrupt. Peter publicly denied Jesus 3 times. The disciples fell asleep while praying. I get that. The woman at the well was divorced 5 times. Zacchaeus was little. Paul was really religious. God used them all. So I don't think you've got any excuses. I don't think you can beat all those excuses. I'm sorry. You are called as a disciple of Jesus to be a bringer of shalom to the community where you live. Look at church and think it's changing. It's just not what it was. But maybe that's because God's changing it and calling us to something different. Can I pray? Let's pray together. I'd like you to I'm going to say a line and then I'd like you to say, I place into your hands, Lord. Okay, we'll say that together. All that I am, I place into your hands, Lord. All that I do, I place into your hands, Lord. Everything I work for, I place into your hands, Lord. Those who I work with, I place into your hands, Lord. Everything I hope for, I place into your hands, Lord. The troubles that weary me, I place into your hands, Lord. The thoughts that disturb me, I place into your hands, Lord. Each one I pray for, I place into your hands, Lord. Lord, help us to work out the tool that you've put in our hands and to take shalom, peace, and justice to the places where we live. Amen.